Welcome to Revenge with Arya. My brother called me on a Tuesday. He said he just needed a place to land for a few weeks, maybe help with a few bills, until his freelance work picked back up. I said yes before he even finished the sentence because that's what I do. That's what I've always done. 3 months later, I was sitting across from a federal investigator while my brother was probably still asleep on someone's couch in Scottsdale, completely unbothered, completely unreachable, and completely unaware that I had spent the last 72 hours building the most airtight paper trail of his entire miserable life. He made one mistake. He forgot that I'm the one who taught him everything he knows about money. And I kept better records than he ever imagined. Let me back up. My name is Cassidy Moore. I'm 28. I run a boutique event planning company called Lumen & Co. out of Charlotte, North Carolina. I built it from scratch over 4 years, starting with small birthday parties and corporate brunches and working my way up to full venue weddings, product launches, and nonprofit galas. By the time my brother called me that Tuesday in February, Lumen & Co. had 6 active vendor contracts, a business checking account with a healthy operating balance, and a line of credit I had never once touched because I believed in running lean. I was proud of that. I had every reason to be. My brother is 32. He's always been the charming one, the one who could talk his way into a room and talk his way out of consequences. Growing up, everyone said he had potential. Teachers loved him. Coaches loved him. Our parents forgave him things they never would have forgiven me. And they called it balance. I called it what it was, but I kept that opinion to myself for a long time. He told me he'd had a rough year. A client had stiffed him on a big project. His lease was up. He was trying to get his portfolio together to pitch a new agency. He needed maybe $2,000 to cover a gap, and could he stay in my guest room while he sorted things out? I said yes to all of it. I transferred the money that same night. I gave him a key the following weekend. What I didn't do, and what I have spent a lot of hours since wishing I had done, was change the passcode on my home office filing cabinet. I keep physical copies of everything related to Lumen & Co. in that cabinet. Contracts, tax documents, vendor agreements, insurance policies, and yes, the folder that contains my business banking information and the secondary debit card I keep as a backup for vendor emergencies. I hadn't used that card in over a year. I hadn't even thought about it. It was just sitting there in a labeled folder inside a locked cabinet that apparently my brother, who grew up in the same house as me and watched me hide things in the same spot since we were children, had no trouble getting into. I found out what happened the way I find out most important things. I was working late on a Thursday, reconciling vendor invoices for an upcoming spring gala, and I noticed a charge on my business account that I didn't recognize. It was from a company called Meridian Lux Holdings. The amount was $412. That alone wouldn't have alarmed me. Vendors sometimes charge small fees that look unfamiliar on the first pass. What alarmed me was that when I searched the name, Meridian Lux Holdings had no website, no business license I could find, and no presence anywhere except as a shell listed in Nevada. And that charge had been preceded, in the previous 6 weeks, by 11 other charges from similarly vague company names totaling just over $23,000. I sat very still for a long moment. Then I scrolled back further. There was the secondary card, the backup I kept for emergencies. It had been activated 3 weeks after my brother moved in. The charges started small. $40 here, $90 there. Gas stations, grocery stores, a restaurant I didn't recognize. Then they got bigger. A hotel in Tempe, 2 nights at something called the Cascada Resort outside Sedona, a car rental, a spa charge that made my jaw tighten. And then the Meridian Lux invoices, which I now understood were not vendor payments at all. They were transfers, structured carefully just under thresholds that would have triggered automatic alerts, going somewhere I couldn't immediately trace. Total, across all of it, $26,840. I called my brother. He picked up on the second ring, which surprised me. His voice was easy, relaxed, a little groggy. He asked how I was doing. I asked where he was. He said Scottsdale, visiting a friend working on a pitch. I said that sounded nice. I asked if he'd had a good time at the Cascada Resort. There was a very brief pause. How'd you hear about that? Your name is not on that card, I said. But your fingerprints are all over the charges. Another pause, longer this time, and then, in a tone that I still think about sometimes when I'm trying to explain to people who've never had this experience what it feels like to be betrayed by someone you've protected your entire life, he laughed. He actually laughed. He said, "Come on, Cass. It's not like you're hurting. You've got money. That account has 6 figures in it. I barely touched it. $26,000. Barely touched." I said, "That's not your account." He said, "It's not like you were using it." That was the moment. Not the discovery, not the investigation that came after, not the court dates, or the calls from our mother, or any of the rest of it. That was the moment I understood that he had never once, not in 32 years, looked at me and seen a person who had worked for what she had. He had looked at me and seen a resource, a backup plan, a safety net he was entitled to cut holes in whenever he felt like falling. I didn't argue with him. I said, "Okay," and I hung up. Then I called my business attorney. Her name is Priya Nair. She's been my attorney since I incorporated Lumen & Co. 3 years ago, and she's one of those people who never sounds rattled, no matter what you tell her. I explained everything. The charges, the secondary card, the shell company invoices, the Sedona resort, all of it. When I finished, she was quiet for about 4 seconds, and then she said, "Did he access the card physically, or did he have the number?" I told her physically, from the filing cabinet. "That's not just unauthorized card use," she said. "That's theft by taking and potentially identity fraud if he used your business information to create those vendor entities. We need to pull the full transaction trail and get it to your bank's fraud department tonight." I asked her, "Civil or criminal?" She said, "Let's see how much he spent first. Then we decide how hard we go." I told her the number. She said, "Criminal. We're going criminal." The next 3 days were the most methodical I've ever been in my life. Priya submitted a formal fraud complaint to my business bank. They froze all activity on the secondary card and opened an internal investigation. I pulled every transaction, organized them by date, cross-referenced the shell company charges with my brother's known location data, which I could piece together from the hotel records and his own social media posts because he had been documenting the entire trip publicly with photos, tagged locations, and cheerful captions about finally taking a breather and investing in himself. The Sedona resort photo had 47 likes. I screenshotted every single one. My business liability insurance had a fraud protection clause I had honestly forgotten about until Priya reminded me. We filed a claim. The adjuster called within 48 hours, reviewed the documentation, and flagged the Meridian Lux transfers for a separate inquiry because structured transfers to shell entities cross a line that takes it out of simple card fraud and into wire fraud territory. That meant federal jurisdiction. I didn't know how to feel about that. For about 12 hours I sat with it, because there is a difference between wanting justice and wanting to be the person who handed your brother a federal charge. I called my best friend. I called my therapist. And I went back, the way I always do when I'm about to talk myself out of something I know is right, to the folder. I have a folder on my personal drive. I started it years ago, not because I was planning anything, but because my brother has always had a way of rewriting history, and I learned early that the only way to stay sane in a family where that's allowed is to keep your own record. In that folder, the $2,000 I transferred in February, no repayment, no mention. The $1,400 I paid toward his car insurance in 2021 after he called me crying from a gas station. The $800 for his security deposit on an apartment he left, trashed 8 months later. The time I let him use my personal credit score as a reference for a lease application, and he called a neighbor I'd vouched for to harass because they complained about his noise. A pattern. Not a single incident. A 20-year pattern of my brother treating every good thing I did for him as proof that more good things were available. I sent the folder to Priya. I told her I wanted it included in the case as documented history of a financial exploitation pattern. She read through it and called me back. "This is exactly what we need," she said. "This is motive, context, and history. This tells a story." I asked what story. She said that this was not impulsive, that he understood exactly whose account he was accessing and calculated that you wouldn't report it. She was right. He had calculated that. He had looked at 28 years of me absorbing the consequences of his choices and assumed this would be one more time. He had bet on my guilt and my loyalty and my lifelong belief that keeping the peace was worth the cost. He had miscalculated. My mother called 2 days after I filed the fraud complaint. I knew she would. My brother had gotten there first, which meant she'd heard a version of events in which I was the one doing something wrong. Her voice when she called me had that particular flatness she gets when she's decided something and is calling not to discuss it but to deliver a verdict. She said I was being dramatic. She said my brother had made a mistake and the right thing to do was to let the family handle it internally. She said if I pursued this, I would be hurting people who loved me for the sake of money. And what did that say about my priorities? I let her finish. And then I said, he stole from my business. This isn't a personal account. This is a registered LLC with vendors and payroll and insurance. What he did has legal consequences whether I report it or not. I'm not creating those consequences. They already exist. I'm just not hiding them. She said, you're choosing a lawsuit over your brother. I said, he chose a vacation over my livelihood. She told me I'd always been the difficult one, the rigid one, the one who couldn't let things go. I thought about the folder. About the 14 years of things I had quietly, completely let go. I said, not this time, and I ended the call. I expected that to be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 days later, I came out to my car in the parking deck beneath my office building and found the driver's side window cracked in a spider web pattern from the corner. Not shattered, just cracked, deliberately. The kind of thing you do when you want someone to understand that they are being watched and that there are people willing to do small, ugly things to communicate a message. I filed a police report. I installed cameras at the parking deck entrance and outside my office door that same afternoon. I sent a note to my building's security team. And I texted my brother one sentence. I've reported the window. It's on camera. Don't test me again. He replied with a single word, relax. I forwarded it to Priya. The bank's investigation concluded on a Friday. The fraud claim was approved in full. The charges were reversed, and my account balance was restored. The secondary card was permanently cancelled and reissued under new credentials. And then, as Priya had warned me, the bank exercised its right of subrogation, meaning they had absorbed the loss and now had the legal standing to pursue my brother directly for restitution. I was no longer the only one coming for him. A financial institution with a legal department that existed specifically for this purpose was now also coming for him. That's when he stopped finding the situation funny. His first message came at 11 at night. It was long, emotional in the way only people who have never faced real consequences can be emotional, focused almost entirely on himself and how hard things had been and how I didn't understand what it was like to struggle the way he had struggled. He said he'd been in a dark place. He said Scottsdale was supposed to be a reset. He said if I dropped the case, he would pay me back, he swore. He would figure out a way to make it right. I read it twice. I noticed he had not apologized. Not once in 400 words had he said sorry. He had explained and excused and contextualized, but the word sorry did not appear. I replied, the debt belongs to the bank now. Contact their recovery department. My mother sent a follow-up message 2 hours later. She said I had embarrassed this family in a way that could never be undone, and she hoped I was proud of myself. She said she didn't raise me to be the kind of person who used the legal system as a weapon against her own blood. I stared at that message for a long time. I thought about how to answer it. And then I thought about a thing I have believed for a long time but rarely said out loud, which is that the word family should describe a relationship, not a debt you didn't choose. That being someone's daughter or someone's sister is not a contract you signed, agreeing to absorb whatever they take from you in silence. That loyalty is not the same thing as complicity. I had been confusing those two things for most of my life, and my brother had benefited from that confusion, and so had everyone who had ever looked away while he did it. I didn't answer her message. I archived it. The case moved to a formal hearing 4 weeks later. My brother hired a lawyer, which surprised me briefly until Priya explained that the bank's recovery team had already sent him a demand letter, and he was more scared than he was letting on. He showed up in a suit I had never seen before, pressed and serious, sitting at a table on the opposite side of the room from me, not looking in my direction. He looked smaller than I remembered, not literally, but something about seeing him in a room where he couldn't charm his way through, couldn't reframe the narrative, couldn't call our mother and let her smooth things over, made him look like exactly what he was, a 32-year-old man who had never been required to face what he did. When the judge asked if I wanted to make a statement, I stood up, not with anger. I want to be clear about that because people sometimes assume this kind of story ends with rage, and I don't think that's honest. I stood up with something quieter and more durable than anger. I stood up with clarity. I said, I'm not here to punish my brother. I'm here because I built something, and someone who was supposed to love me decided it was available to him without asking. I'm here because $26,000 is not a rounding error in a small business budget. It is vendor payments. It is payroll. It is the months of work that preceded the money in that account. And I'm here because if I don't say that on record, someone will eventually tell this story, and I will be the villain in it. I want the record to reflect what actually happened. He took something that wasn't his. I asked for it back. That's the whole story. The ruling was issued 2 weeks after the hearing. My brother was ordered to pay full restitution to the bank plus court fees. A financial fraud notation was placed on his record that would flag any new lines of credit or business applications for the next 7 years. The judge also noted the structured nature of the shell company transfers as evidence of premeditation, which elevated the classification from simple theft to financial fraud with planning, which carried a steeper civil penalty. There was no jail time. I want to be honest about that because I think people expect these stories to end with someone in handcuffs, and often they don't. What there was, a formal record, a financial liability he couldn't explain away or transfer to me, and a legal flag that would follow him every time he tried to do to someone else what he had done to me. It wasn't everything. It was enough. Outside the courthouse, my brother was waiting on the steps. I don't know why. Maybe he thought there was still a conversation to be had. Maybe he thought that seeing me in person would give him something he could use. He was still in the suit. He looked tired. He said, I hope you feel like you won. I said, this wasn't a competition. He said, you really think this makes you better than me? I had thought about this moment, actually thought about it long before the hearing, because I knew this question was coming, and I knew what the right answer was. Not the polite answer, not the diplomatic answer, the true one. I looked at him and I said, yes, in this specific situation, what I did was better than what you did. I worked for what I have. You took what I worked for. That's not a complicated comparison. He stared at me, and then he said something that I think was meant to wound me but landed like nothing at all. He said I had always thought I was too good for this family. I said no, I just stopped letting this family be the reason I accept less than I deserve. And then I walked to my car, and I drove home, and I didn't cry, and I didn't call anyone, and I didn't feel the relief I had expected to feel. What I felt was more like a window opening in a room that had been closed for a long time. Not joy exactly, air. The weeks after that were quiet, in a way I hadn't experienced in years. No emergency calls, no late-night Venmo requests, no messages that started with, I know this is bad timing, but I updated my security protocols for Lumen & Co., added two-factor authentication on all financial accounts, changed the locks on my home office filing cabinet, and installed a document shredder for anything sensitive. I hired a part-time bookkeeper to run a weekly reconciliation so nothing would sit unreviewed long enough to disappear. I also had a conversation I had been avoiding, with myself mostly, about what it means to help people. I had spent a long time believing that saying yes was the same as being generous. I had confused availability with love. I had let people treat my reliability as a resource to be extracted rather than a quality to be respected. And I had told myself that was family, that was loyalty, that was what good people do. What I know now is different. Good people help. But good people also hold the line. Good people notice when help is being mistaken for access. And good people understand that protecting what you've built is not the same as being selfish. It is, in fact, the only way to have anything left to give. I blocked my brother's number in early April. I didn't do it in anger. I did it the way you remove a splinter. carefully, and with the specific intention of stopping an infection that has already gone on too long. I kept my mother's contact because our relationship is more complicated, and I haven't finished deciding what I want to do with it. But I stopped answering calls that came at night. I stopped reading messages that arrived during working hours. I started, slowly and with considerable effort, learning to treat my own peace as something worth protecting. One afternoon in May, I was at a vendor meeting downtown, and I walked past a stationery shop on my way back to the parking deck. In the window, there was a display of personalized items, notebooks, pens, card cases, and a slim gold card holder with room for a business card on the front. Simple and clean and exactly the kind of thing I would buy for a client gift, but had never bought for myself. I went inside and I bought it. I had my business card slipped into the front sleeve before I even left the store. It sounds like a small thing. It was a small thing. But sometimes the small things are the ones that mean exactly what they mean, which is, I built this, it is mine, and no one gets to reach into it anymore without asking. I used to think that the people who love you test you. That love was something you proved by enduring. My grandmother used to say something different. She used to say that people who love you don't need you to keep proving it. I think I misunderstood that for a long time. I thought it meant I had to make myself easy to love, by never saying no, never pushing back, never drawing a line. What it actually means is simpler than that. People who love you don't put you in positions that require you to choose between your self-respect and them. When someone keeps asking you to make that choice, they have already told you what you need to know. My brother told me a long time ago. I just kept deciding not to hear it. I heard it now. The gold card holder sits on my desk at Lumen & Co., next to my monitor, where I can see it every morning when I sit down. It is not a trophy. It is not a reminder of what happened. It is a reminder of something else. Something I had to lose, $26,000 and a brother, and about 4 years of misplaced loyalty to finally understand, which is that the only person who has ever consistently shown up for Cassidy Moore is Cassidy Moore. That's not a sad thing anymore. It used to feel like one. Now it just feels like clarity, like standing in a room with no clutter, like knowing exactly what you have, exactly what it cost you, and exactly what you will and will not let happen to it going forward. Lumen & Co. has a gala in 3 weeks. 90 guests, a rooftop venue, a floral installation I've been designing for 2 months. The vendor contracts are signed. The accounts are clean. The bookkeeper runs her reconciliation every Friday morning. And every single financial account has notifications set to alert me for any transaction over $50. My brother has not paid the bank yet. Priya says they're pursuing wage garnishment. I do not call to check. I do not think about it on most days. On the days I do, I remind myself that it is no longer my problem to solve. It belongs to a process that exists for exactly this reason, and that process does not need my attention or my grief or my continued sacrifice to function. I am not the one who has to figure out how to pay that debt back. For the first time in a very long time, I am not the one who has to figure anything out except what comes next for me. And what comes next for me is the gala. And after that, a contract I've been negotiating with a hospitality group that would be the largest single client in Lumen & Co.'s history. And after that, whatever I decide, in whatever order I decide it, with full and complete ownership of everything I build from here. I closed the last folder on my desktop related to the case on a Wednesday night in late spring. Fraud complaint, bank correspondence, insurance claim, court documents. I moved them to a single archive folder. Password protected, saved in 3 places because I have learned to keep records, and then I closed the window. I opened a new one and started drafting the vendor timeline for the gala. It felt like the most ordinary thing in the world. Quietly, completely ordinary. And I think that's what healing actually feels like when it isn't performed for anyone. Not dramatic, not triumphant, just the absence of the weight you carried so long you stopped noticing it was there. I made tea. I worked for another hour. I went to bed before midnight for the first time in weeks. In the morning I woke up and my business was still mine, and my name was still clean, and the card holder was still on my desk, and I went to work.